Prime Minister Mark Carney says he intends to meet with coastal First Nations. This comes in the wake of their criticism of the federal government's new pipeline deal with Alberta. BC Assembly of First Nations Regional Chief Terry Teegee expressed yesterday on the show how the deal is being received by some members of his community.
There's a lot of mistrust right here. There are a lot of people feel deceived about some of the political maneuvers by this government in terms of getting an MOU with Alberta.
BC Premier David Eby continued today to express concern about the proposed pipeline. He also affirmed that the province is willing to engage in discussions about optimizing the Trans Mountain pipeline.
Frustration is obviously that apparently that's not sufficient, that there also needs to be that British Columbia agrees, even in the absence of any project, to get rid of the oil tanker ban off of the North Coast, which is the foundational keystone to Indigenous support for all of the projects we put on the major projects board with the federal government.
For the federal government's perspective, Mandy Gull-Masty is the Minister of Indigenous Services, and she joins me now. Hi, Minister. Thanks for coming on.
Hi, Wajah JP.
The Prime Minister promised that chiefs would have some part of Indigenous consultation on these major projects, that they would have a chance to have their say. But some leaders are demanding Indigenous consent before shovels hit the ground on a new oil pipeline. Where do you stand? Should First Nations have a veto on what gets built?
Thank you for the question, JP. Major projects is one of the initiatives that was launched by this government. There has been a lot of discussion. There's been a lot of reaction since the time of the passing of the bill. Everybody in Indigenous world that has been speaking to me has a different opinion, from responding to the economic crisis that they're in, those that are, wondering what this is going to do in terms of impacting them as a nation. What is important is that the work that we're doing here in this space has to align with ensuring that the criteria that are identified in major projects respect the interests of First Nations people to participate. This includes, even before consultation engagement, to ensure that proponents have brought Indigenous people in the space of the project. When it comes to Major Projects Office, they are identifying the probability of a project moving forward. The duty to consult still lays with the Crown. This is additional work that we have to do. Everybody is in a different time and place in terms of their relationship, their desire to participate or not. We have to meet everybody in that space where they are in community.
I guess I'm just confused about what is actually required, because the text of the MOU says Alberta and Canada recognize their obligations to consult with and, where appropriate, accommodate Indigenous peoples. There's nothing in there about consent, and I think that's where the confusion really lies. What is required on major projects on this pipeline in particular? Do Indigenous peoples just need to be consulted, or do they have to offer their consent?
My previous response was in addressing the Major Projects Office itself. In terms of this MOU that we've seen come out of Alberta, it is speaking to, first of all, creating space for conversation. This is one of the things that I've heard from the Prime Minister, speaking to what is happening in Alberta now, what is the space and reaction and reflection of the First Nations in this province, and also creating the space to have that conversation with First Nations in the province beside, in BC. We heard him announce, as part of the Assemblies of First Nations, the intent to move forward with engagement. I respect and heard my colleague, Regional Chief Teegee. There is a lot of reaction in this space, because clearly, people are wondering, what is that next step? For the first time, you've seen the signing of an MOU of this nature, of this magnitude. When something new is introduced that's trying to bring something forward, there's a lot of work to do. We have to clarify, ensure that we're supporting everybody to come to the table, not just to be part of the consultation process, but for them, if they wish to express interest in being a partner and an owner in what a potential project looks like, including that of a pipeline, that space is committed and provided for them.
Do you personally support a new oil pipeline to BC?
Personally, as a former leader, I know that it is not the place for an individual person to decide what the future of a nation looks like. I would always refer back to my membership, to the people that are in the nation, to guide that process. So I think that in this space, I'm going to respect the authority of community to decide what the outlook of their future is.
The BC Coastal First Nations are not equivocating. They are diametrically opposed, as you know. You mentioned Chief TG. The AFN passed a resolution demanding that this MOU be ripped up entirely. Is the government prepared to push through this pipeline, even if there's no buy-in from Indigenous peoples in the area where this pipeline could end?
You've heard the Prime Minister in, all things that pertain to major projects in this country. There's criteria that have to be reached. Interest of Indigenous peoples is a first step. Ensuring that you do consultation, having the conversation of what that looks like. All of the things that I've heard this week vary from those who are supportive, also to those who are concerned and do not want to move this conversation forward. But the first step that we have to take is to create the space to look at what it is we are going to discuss. What comes of those discussions, it is the work of the federal government and provincial governments to work together to understand what are the concerns of First Nations, what are they putting on the table, what is it that they want to see, if they wish to advance, what are the criteria to have that conversation, what are the requirements that they need to be a partner if they wish to do so. But also, we have to do the critical work of respecting communities that, are in a space where they're questioning, trying to understand, or have taken a position that they do not want things to move forward. How do you find that? I'm a minister that's part of a cabinet. I'm there to support the Prime Minister as well as premiers to ensure that this is undertaken in a conversation that is done in a respectful way, that is aware that people who come to the table who are First Nations have a very different relationship with the land, are front line, that see the realities of change in the landscape, and that we have to do everything that we can to support them so that they continue to have that relationship and protect their identity as First Nations people.
I want to ask you about drinking water advisories. That's another thing that's on your list of priorities. It's something we've obviously been talking about for a long time, and there has been some progress over the last 10 years. A number of them have been lifted, but more than 24 long-term advisories remain in Ontario. There are other short-term advisories as well. What's going on here? What's holding you back? Why can't the government get clean drinking water for these First Nations?
Thank you. Thank you for that question. I think this is something that I've heard from across the country, not just from First Nations people. Canadians are concerned about First Nations water and access to clean drinking water. There are 38 boil water advisories of different nature. Some of them are because of breakdown of equipment. Some of them is because of turnover of staff. Some are waiting for additional work to be undertaken. And some of them are very complex. It's touching more than water. It's touching infrastructure. In some places, it's touching, the community's history and, the trauma that has been created by not having access to clean water. It is the work of this government and now me as a minister to ensure that we are able to complete that process. We have lifted a number of boil water advisories. Over 140 of them have been completed to date. Some have moved forward. Some have been reissued. I think this is a very real and transparent response on my behalf that you are always going to have to do work in this space because communities are learning to, have new infrastructure. People are coming on board. People are, being supported in the place that they're in. This week, we heard the announcement of the Prime Minister with regards to the legislation that will be tabled in spring of 2026. But also I had the opportunity to meet community one-on-one. One of the longest standing boil water advisories, Niskandiga, we had the chance to speak with one another, continuing to do the work to move the file forward. I'm there to support Chief and Council. I'm there to support community. I know that some of these issues are long-standing and very complex. I want to meet them in the space that they're in and provide them the resource and the different means that they need to address that.
All right, let's leave it there. Thank you so much, Mandy Gull-Masty, Minister of Indigenous Services. Appreciate you coming on. Nice to see you, Minister.
Thank you, Miigwech.